Bitcoin's dead, right? At least that's what you're told in the media. Its price has dropped down from 126K all the way down to 93,000, and it will never, ever recover. But in our last video, we talked about how nation states like the Czech Republic have just bought $1 million worth of Bitcoin. We spoke about how tiny countries like Luxembourg have just put a whole 1% of their portfolio into Bitcoin. So if Bitcoin really is dead, then what are these nation states doing? Well, there's two words for that: game theory. And in today's video, David and I are going to explore what these nation states are really thinking, and more importantly, why they have to think that way. Because be under no illusion, the game is already being played, whether these nation states know it or not. So David, I saw a headline this week, and I think we spoke about it in our last video, but basically China has accused the US of stealing 127,000 Bitcoin. Now, the US got this seized from a pig butchering scam, is my understanding, but the person they confiscated it from was a Chinese citizen. Now, the reason this got me thinking about it was, if China, who has notoriously banned Bitcoin and everything from Bitcoin mining to ownership to custodianship to any type of transaction, and they've done this multiple times, if they're so anti-Bitcoin, why would they even accuse the US of stealing it? Why wouldn't they just ignore it or say, good, we didn't want to have that Bitcoin anyway. We didn't want any of our citizens using it. Well, the reason is because when you look at the largest nation states that actually hold Bitcoin, you might be surprised to know that the two largest by a country mile are the United States and China. And up until recently, before this confiscation, the US and China arguably had the same amount of Bitcoin. The US had a slight lead. But now the US has an over 50% lead on China's holdings. They now have over 300,000, while China still has less than 200,000. So it got me thinking, why was that? Now, the only reason I could think about why China would care is game theory. So David, do you know anything about game theory?
Yeah, I know a bit about it. It's the study of how individuals and groups make decisions based on basically what the other person is doing.
Gotcha. And I understand, am I right in saying that you've developed a slide for us, or are you going to talk us through an example later on?
Yeah, definitely.
Awesome. Look forward to it. What I find interesting, and we'll come on to this later, is that scenario doesn't always align with what we think is the best course of action to take. Now, really funny, because as always, you've read my mind. Saylor, as in Michael Saylor, the CEO of MicroStrategy, definitely understands game theory. And so I'm just going to play this clip for you, and I just want you to listen to what he says.
All these wonderful models. If 10 billionaires decide to buy $1 billion of Bitcoin each and announce we bought it, we're not ashamed of it, we're going to buy more. All your models are destroyed, completely devastated. Bitcoin goes to the moon.
Now, what exactly did he mean by that? He means that the first person to buy the Bitcoin, because Bitcoin has a fixed supply and it's a superior monetary network, the first player to buy that in bulk wins. And you can see that in his actions. So this is the top 10 largest public treasury companies in the world. And you can see that Strategy has over 640,000 Bitcoin. Now, their next biggest competitor, Mara Holdings, has 50,000. So Saylor has bought so aggressively that it's almost, in my opinion, impossible for anyone to catch him. So we're going to play a little game. We're going to play our own version of game theory. Yeah. And David, you're going to be my test subject to help our viewers understand what game theory is. So I've got a little summary of the rules of the game, because like any game, our little game theory, Bitcoin game theory game has to have rules. Now, first rule is that we're assuming that global debt is unsustainable. We know that it's at 350 trillion. The fact that it's 4 times the size of global GDP means that we feel that it cannot continue like this. To put it in perspective, if I were to have a job that paid me $100,000, but being $400,000 worth of debt And if that debt was increasing faster than my salary increases every year, it wouldn't take long before everyone said, well, you're going to go bankrupt. But strangely, when it comes to nation states, individuals like myself, David, never used to think that this was even a possibility. But it is. So that's our first assumption. The second is that there's no realistic way to repay that debt via taxes or growth. So despite what the Trump administration, Scott Bessent, etc., says, they're not going to be able to grow their way out of it with AI, etc. The third is, as David has said in many, many videos, is that Bitcoin's supply is strictly limited. It's got a 21 million supply max of coins, and that cannot be increased. We're also going to account for lost coins. So the theories about lost coins, because people have lost their private keys or access to their coins, is that there's between 4 to 6 million lost. We're assuming 6 million for this scenario. Now, any nation that moves early will control the scarce monetary base. By that, I mean, like Michael Saylor, the first one to make this action arguably is going to win because they'll control the majority of it. So early accumulation is cheaper as well. Once again, Bitcoin's price is less than 100,000 today. And also, prices would be expected to increase as nation state bid against each other. So you've got to buy quickly. So aggressive moves are going to trigger the competitors. Let's put it this way. You've heard of a bank run. Well, why is there such a thing as a bank run? Well, it's because of panic. Yeah, fear more specifically, and also fear of missing out in one way. So think about it. If you heard the bank is running out of money, the last thing you want to do is be the last one to go to the bank when they've already run out of money. You're not going to wait. You're going to go there right then and there. But the trouble is, by doing that, you may be contributing to the very problem. There might not have been a bank run, but by you running out into the streets, screaming at the top of your lungs, hey, there's going to be a bank run. The banks don't have our money. We need to go get it. You might be causing the very thing that you wanted to avoid. So the idea is that aggressive moves may trigger your competitors out of fear to act the same way. So if one nation buys too visibly, others accelerate accumulation. This creates a strategic race. Kind of think of it like the nuclear or the AI arms race that we're seeing at the moment. Moving too slowly, however, is catastrophic because you risk losing the race and being completely left behind. And here's the thing. The most important part is you've only got one chance to win. So, David, do you understand the rules?
Yeah, you're setting the scene really nicely because I remember when Michael Saylor first started buying Bitcoin back in August of 2020. He realized, he couldn't sleep for that whole week, because he was thinking, I'm not going to be able to buy enough Bitcoin. And if you remember correctly, every month he would come out with a new historic purchase of hundreds of millions of Bitcoin, putting it on MicroStrategy's balance sheet, in addition to his personal holdings, right? So he's all about game theory. As you played his video, he's all about, I'm not moving fast enough to acquire as much Bitcoin as possible, because if I stop, then BlackRock or other nation states are going to be kind of in the lead, and they're going to be buying more, and it's going to be convincing other corporations to be putting it on their balance sheet. So I love this. I love this game.
Excellent. Well, I'm glad to hear it, because you're going to actually be the person playing it, and you're going to play as good old Uncle Sam. Yeah, so the good old US of A in this game. Now, Sam, that's what I'm going to call you from now on, or Unc if you prefer that.
Sam.
You've got three options. Yes, I'll go with Sam. Here you go then, Sam. Here's your options. So you can go for aggressive early accumulation. You can go for stealth accumulation, so slowly and quietly through indirect channels, or you can delay and observe. So you can maintain the status quo, focus on regulation and monitoring. Now, bear in mind, you're the current owner of the world's reserve currency. You have the most to lose by adopting Bitcoin in many ways, because Bitcoin, or moving to any other asset or monetary network as opposed to the US dollar, has its risks. Even though the fiat system and the US dollar has its problems, at least it's one for now you can control. So do you understand the three options?
Yes, yes.
Now, who are your competitors? Now, even though all your competitors are global, it's not just other nation states, it's individuals like myself and David, people watching this video. It's also institutions like Strategy and Michael Saylor. It's the ETF providers like BlackRock. It's many, many more. But for this, I've just picked out your competitors. So we've got China, India, Russia, and the EU. Now, they're all individually thinking about their options. Now, in any of these circumstances, whether you prefer to aggressively buy stealth or just delay and observe, they're thinking about their response. Now, they can either do a rapid counter accumulation, they can coordinate slowly and accumulate, or they can openly refuse, delay, or most importantly, publicly reject. So it doesn't matter if you adopt Bitcoin, they can say, no, we're not going to do it. So you've not just got to think about what you want to do and what makes sense for you. You've got to think about what makes sense for how the other players in this game are going to react.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Now, I've got some to help you with this. I've got some scoring. Yeah. So I don't like making games unfavored, but you have, from what I can tell, got the strongest position in the game. So we've got our 5 players. Now, as you can see, they've got a little score next to them. And that's because I've developed a little cheat sheet to help you understand your position. So the US has the highest Bitcoin holdings. Your macroeconomic strength is unmatched. Yeah, nothing matches your purchasing power. Nothing matches your economic strength in the world. The power of your currency is unmatched. You've got dollars are used for 90% of global trade, and they're universally accepted globally. Your debt, although large, has pretty low stability and is pretty much in a worse position than some of your competitors, but still not much of a downside. Now, your ability to move fast is definitely faster than more bureaucratic countries like India or the European Union, but you're unable to move as fast as completely autocratic countries such as China or Russia. Your energy advantage is bigger once again than the EU or India, but about the same as Russia and Europe. Tech and semiconductors, you and China are big in the space. The EU's moving in, but pretty much it's between you two. Geopolitical incentive to exit the US dollar. Now, this was the part that I mentioned earlier. You have the lowest incentive, but China and Russia have very high incentive to do so because of the sanctions and the control and the inflation that you've pushed upon them. The retail adoption in your country is pretty strong, and generally your control preference, so whether you'd rather have complete control like via CBDC or use Bitcoin, is pretty much from what we can see about even right now. But most of the other countries seem to be leaning in the opposite direction. They're going for a CBDC. Now, your ability to accumulate is actually very strong. So if you did decide to move, you could do it pretty quickly. You could do it through stealth if you chose to. And your ability to trigger an arms race in Bitcoin by making any move is also high. So you've got some real strengths and disadvantages there. In one case, you've got the currency power, the macroeconomic strength, the ability to move fast, and you've got the ability to accumulate in secret. But any move that you make may trigger an arms race. So do you have any questions about this or who you're playing as or what your competitors might do?
No, I'm looking forward to getting into this.
Right. So here's the game. Now, I want you've got 4 options. Yeah. Sorry, 3 options. So sorry, let me start again. Okay, so you've got 4 options. You can go for the shock and awe strategy. You can aggressive buying as quickly as you can, the Michael Saylor strategy, let's call it. You can do 2, the stealth or managed strategy. So you can try and accumulate Bitcoin in ways that aren't immediately obvious to your competitors. But the risk is that if they do find out, maybe they might move aggressively and outrun you, and you lose the advantage you have. Same with the slow hedge. Now, the advantage of that is that obviously you'd be able to push off having a competitor to the US dollar for long enough and see if you can do anything about it. But once again, you might be outrun. Or you could simply just do nothing. You could choose to ban Bitcoin again, become very aggressive towards it and other cryptocurrencies, or you could just ignore it, pretend like it doesn't exist. So where are you leaning at the moment?
I'm leaning towards profile number 2, the stealth and managed option.
Why are you planning that? And let's just
Because
move
I
back.
know. Sorry?
I said I'll just bring this slide up in case you want to reference it. But
Yeah, it's helpful because you know what? I don't want to create a large kind of bank run on the US dollar, right? I'm dependent on the world continuing to demand US dollars. And the minute I'm overt about my acquisition of Bitcoin, it's gonna kind of shock the price. It's gonna, we're no longer gonna have our stronghold of the world reserve currency. So I think that's my number one reason. It's I'm too indebted in the US dollar.
I think that's a good move. So, but let's see if you're right. So you've chosen to ignore it. Well, that's the worst case scenario. Yeah. You suppress the price of Bitcoin, and the risk is that others are going to continue their adoption. Bitcoin is completely decentralized. It has no central authority that can control it. It's got over 20,000 nodes worldwide that contribute to the safety of the network, as well as the mining nodes. It's already got past the point, according to many, that you could control it. So by doing this, you would inevitably lose your one opportunity to accumulate. But what about if you, what about if your followers, sorry, what about if your competitors chose to move slowly as well? And what if they refused or delayed to engage with Bitcoin as well? Well, in the worst, that's actually still better than if the US decided to fight it and then their competitor aggressively bought it up, because the legacy system would still limp on, but the US has no Bitcoin option available to it in order to refinance the debt.
Right.
So did you think that was going to be the worst option?
Yes, I did.
Yes, good.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next one. What do you think is going to be the second worst option for the US in this scenario, based on what their competitors might do? Do you think it's going to be slow hedge, stealth managed, or shock and awe?
I'm going to say slow hedge, because the thing is, I'm thinking of option 1, the shock and awe, is Michael Saylor, and he's not a stupid man.
Yeah, gotcha. Okay. So you're right. So this option is slightly better. So if the US shows a slow hedge, the one of the better cases they could hope for is that their opponents act the same way. So it looks prudent domestically, but only a mild hedge. So once again, no debt problem is solved. And in the worst case, if they start slowly accumulating, it shows their opponents that they're not serious, or their opponents think that they're not seriously committed about it, and they kind of, Bitcoin falls into irrelevancy, and they lose the bonus that could have come from them accumulating slowly. And what's worse is that if their opponents, say China, aggressively buys Bitcoin, they've lost their edge again. But at least they've got something in their coffers, because they were slowly accumulating in the background. But still, this is not good. None of these options are good for the US.
Yes.
So, do you think you were right or wrong? Which of these options do you think is the next worst for the US?
I think the shock and awe.
I'll give you a chance to change your answer if you want to.
That's a good option, but I'm still going to stick with my option 2.
Okay. I'm sorry to say that you are correct. So, problem with the US accumulating and following the Saylor strategy is, in the event that their opponents slowly adopt, the US secures more early, so it can definitely build up a big stack. But it's suboptimal. What they really want, if they were to go for the shock and awe, is they'd want their enemies to accumulate as slowly as possible, so they could make their stack as big as possible. Many people don't think that. Many people think, well, the US should go in as big as early as possible in the hopes that the rest of the world then follows them. So actually not in the US's advantage to do that. What they want is slow. They want to show the world that they're serious about this thing,
right?
But have the rest of the world adopt slowly so that they can continue to accumulate. And if you look at the outcome of if they do go for this shock and awe strategy, because the outcome from their side is unknown, they can only play their hand. So they play their hand and they aggressively start to accumulate. Well, we saw in the last screen that China and Russia, because they're authoritarian, can move very, very quickly. So once again, the US starts strong, but triggers global Bitcoin arms race, which drives up the price very quickly because it's highly illiquid at scale. And so they can't quietly accumulate anymore. So David, I'm happy to announce that the best option was indeed a stealth managed approach. Now, the worst case scenario that you have with this, as playing as Uncle Sam, is if discovered early that you're stealthily accumulating, others react aggressively, and the US you'll still be ahead because of your Bitcoin holdings, but with less of a share than ideal. But you still end up in the plus. But in order to really solve your problems, what you actually want is one of two things to happen. You want your enemies to refuse or delay to engage so that you can continue to accumulate as long as possible. Or in the best case, the US will accumulate large Bitcoin positions quietly, and then they will signal others to follow in slowly. And those others will be buying in higher. Now, the risk for any others is what happens if the US does that? What happens if the US is secretly accumulating Bitcoin right now? What happens if this confiscation of the 127,000 Bitcoin from what happens if the accumulation of, sorry, let me start that bit again. What happens if the seizure of that 127,000 Bitcoin was actually a stealth move aimed at accumulating Bitcoin? As I said, they increased their Bitcoin holdings by 64% in one seizure. So what if that is their approach? To kick the can down the road, but in the background, just continue to accumulate. And don't forget, the current sovereign reserve that the US has is an executive order, meaning it can be undone. But the one thing they have said is that although they've said they will not use public funds to accumulate more, they've said they could use tax neutral ways to accumulate, and they will not sell any Bitcoin that's acquired for 20 years. Right. Now that to me all seems to align with option 2, which is the stealth and the managed approach.
I think you're exactly right. It's really helpful to see both option 1 and 2 side by side, and to kind of be reassured that that's the best option. Because I'm always wondering what Saylor's doing is why in the private, I know the private sector works differently than government, but it's interesting to see how that's playing out with, I mean, Saylor has been vocal since the beginning about, he's going to be the fastest to own. He's always going to be buying the top. He's not going to stop. And he's convincing other corporations to do the same. He gives an annual conference to give people corporations a playbook of how to do it themselves. So you'd wonder, what if the US were to take that approach? What would happen? I
can't see a world where the US makes a move that big, in a big way. Say they accumulate 1 million Bitcoin rapidly, which obviously would need to go through Congress, etc. But maybe there's other ways. They rapidly accumulate Bitcoin and they make it very public. I cannot see a way where their competitors, at least one of them, because don't forget there's multiple players on the board, one of them, just to cover themselves, moves quickly. Because what you don't want to do is, if you look at this board, is have either a competitor who's aggressively buying or acquiring through stealth when you yourself are doing nothing or fighting or ignoring it.
Right.
So I can't see, I think any rational thinking any rational thinker who understands game theory, I think, should be aware of this. And in the event that the US did come out and say, hey, we're going to do this, I think you would see nothing but stealth accumulation, nothing but aggressive accumulation, which is why this answer is the top answer. Stealth accumulation is the best, and ideally you want your opponents to do the same. You want them to acquire slowly. Now, obviously this is game theory. Now, the reason that we sort of use these games is because game theory, specifically this example I'm just going to give you, which is the prisoner's dilemma, which I'm sure, David, you're aware of. It basically teaches us that there's a paradox in decision analysis in which two individuals acting in their own self-interests do not produce the optimal outcome. And you've seen that in the last slide. If the US were to act in its best interest and aggressively accumulate, and China were to aggressively accumulate as well, neither of them would end up with a large enough stake in the Bitcoin network because it's a fixed supply asset. They're far better to basically use game theory to try and predict what's the best move. So here's the prisoners example. The prisoners are basically given two options each. There's two prisoners, prisoner A and prisoner B. They're given two options. The first is to confess, and the second is to remain silent. Now, if they both remain silent, they both get 2 years. If one of them confesses, however, one gets 1 year and the other one gets 8. So in this scenario, it makes complete sense, actually, for them both to remain silent. You'd think that it would be better for them to confess because they could get away with 1 year. But by doing so, if they both confess, they end up with 5 years each. So the best one is to actually be not selfish in this scenario and to stay silent.
So let me understand this correctly. So two con men are, for example, are caught by the police. They're thrown into jail, but they're separated, right? And they're asked the question each individually. They're saying, you know, we can get you out if you confess. You could go scot-free if you just rat on your other, your partner, right? And so these were kind of playing out the different scenarios. If one kind of remains silent and the other one confesses, what are your chances? Or like what would happen at games? Yeah. It's a brilliant model to see what would play out. But in the context of Bitcoin, that's if one actually goes full force and acquires versus one kind of just not doing anything and kind of refusing to enter the game, what plays out. So this is a great model.
Yeah, it is. And I like the fact, the reason I use this one as well is I think that it's very similar. And also the best one is to remain silent, which is very close to stealth accumulation. Yes. If you think about it. That's the best strategy. And it seems to be what we're seeing. David, have you got any final thoughts for our viewers before we end today's show?
No, I think it's a great game. I'm just thinking we should probably create some sort of a game, an online game to have people play this out, because it's fascinating just for your own personal kind of perspective of how you want to be accumulating and coming on board, because this is what's happening in the background. Investors are piling into this, and this is playing out. Game theory is playing out in real time, and not just on the government level, not only on the institutional level, but on the retail level. People are accumulating.
Absolutely. And I love the idea of thinking, I suppose my final thought for our viewers, I mean, you kind of said it best, is this isn't just a nation state level game. It's a game of player versus player.
Yes.
Just because you may not be accumulating and just because you may not understand or believe in Bitcoin's worth, it doesn't mean that other players, people like myself and David, are thinking the same way. Players like myself and David are aggressively accumulating, even though it's small amounts. We are aggressively accumulating. Now, we don't recommend you to necessarily do the same, but it might make sense just to put a percentage in case the worst happens, which is David and I are right, these nation states are right, and they continue to accumulate.
Yeah.
That's it.
That's a great final thought.
That's it. And another way of saying that, another way of saying that, don't you, David? Goes something like this. Most will miss it, most will mock it, and most will wait until it's too late. But the 1%, they act with conviction.
Be a 1%er.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.